Thank you very much. So I'm a psychologist. I'll just say that up front so you know. And if you don't like that, you can leave. No, I'm just kidding. So just one question, Dave. You should keep in mind that you probably had the same observation, but I was wondering what the policy implications are about predicting 3 billion years in the future for the universe.
Has been validated with one model.
One model, right? Okay. So anyway, so the point of today's talk is really to contrast Dave's approach, what he knows, and what I know, and what I'm trying to do, because we're both trying to work together to do the same thing in the future. So try to keep in your mind what he just told you, and then contrast it with this. There's a similarity here to what Dave was talking about with the universe, which is if you're thinking about something like health behavior, so I could have a public health background, and some outcome like smoking cigarettes or not, and you think about the whole system that might impact that. This is an approach we use in public health called the macro-social approach. And if you think about all of this, one of the issues you have, and the same with NDSSL, is we only have one run of this system. If you look at the United States, the last 50 years, it only ran once. So just keep that in mind. But we'd like to conceptualize this as a set of variables and what I call a large-scale sociobiological system. So if you're focusing on something like health behavior, what impacts health behavior? So very broadly, local environments, which could be advertisements that you might see. You walk into a store, there's a bunch of cigarettes. It might be the people you hang out with. Well, that would fall under social and cultural norms. So just think of the way we think of this stuff, and the way my approach of thinking about individuals' behavior at the individual level is to think about. The easiest way to think about it is when you wake up during the day and you go to work, and after you go to work, you go home. You might stop by the pub, or I would anyway. And you come home and you hang out. You might watch TV for a while. And then you go to sleep, and you do this over and over and over. And then in our country, 300 million people do this, and it's a global thing, so we have billions of people doing this every day. This is trying to capture a set of variables at different levels of analysis that impact each person's decision to smoke a cigarette or not the next day, if you think of it in those terms. And the reason, just to back up, so we have socioeconomic, political, industrial, environmental, social, and cultural norms, and health behavior and outcomes. You can see the arrows go different ways. That's just to represent that your behaviors might affect policies, and policies might affect your behaviors in the long run. So the reason I show this graphic is this is really just an organizing framework, but it really tries to, how do I go forward? Tries to capture, this is a representation of some of the work that NDSSL does that you just saw. So I'm not going to describe it in too much detail because I think they did a much better job than I could ever do. But this is one way you might think of representing these kind of processes, right? So and what makes it really interesting to me is the next steps and some of the stuff. It's part of the reason I came to SDAL as a psychologist. I'm interested in taking, does anybody know what this is? Brain. So this is a picture from the Human Connectome Project. So NIH is funded since 2010, a large-scale approach. They want to know not just what parts of the brain are associated with what functions, but they're trying to map out all the connections in the brain. So it's basically a large network analysis of the brain. And it's really interesting because you can also link that to behavior, and we know a lot about the brain from neurophysiological studies from the past, but this is an unprecedented view of all the connections in the brain. So it's almost like this, but it's just within one person. So you can imagine everything here, but we have to deal with this too at the same time at some level, right? And the easy way to think about it, this is how I think about it, because I do computational models of health behavior. So I think of the fact that I can think of a single person as a cognitive system using an artificial neural network or something like that. And I know that people affect each other. So for example, your attitudes about abortion, if you and I talked, it might change my attitudes about abortion if they were different. If they were the same, it might actually bolster my attitudes towards abortion or something like that. So I think of cognitive systems as individual people, and the output of my system actually is the input to your system to some degree, and the output of your system is the input to my system, blah, blah, blah. And this system, the reason we think of what we're trying to do is think of this and the macrosocial approach in these terms, building up from the individual, a set of behaviors, using cognitive systems, cognitive science, and neurophysiology, building up and scaling up to social networks, and eventually scaling up to something like you saw. I should have put somewhere in here I could have put a globe right here, right? I mean, that's where we're headed to some degree. So I just wanted to put the perspective of the sociobiological system. Really, what we've left out here is we've went from the physical systems to these kind of social systems. There's a lot of biology in the talks earlier today, especially. That really kind of fits in here, and this is trying to capture all of that together. And the issue that Dave and I are going to talk about now is when I build these models, and I've done some of this kind of work, this is in work in progress, really. Some of this kind of work, but at a really basic level. And I do work like this, but it's much more abstract than the work that they're doing in DSSL, looking at these kinds of questions. The uncertainty that we have in the models, and we don't know how to deal with it. The work I've done, we don't actually address the question at all. So what we're here to talk about today with Dave is how would we think about doing what he's done with physical systems and understanding the uncertainty of these kind of systems.